Hang in there. Yeah, I love that. Okay, pretty perfect. Okay, so one thing that I do know is that I know I can't see most of you today, and I can see through the small camera. So, hi everyone. I hope you've had a great afternoon. Our talk today will be on building high quality Android applications. So, I am an Android engineer, as I mentioned before, and I've been doing Android now for a decade. Now, the reason as to why I picked this topic is because I do know that from time to time we don't have many people that actually go into mobile development. But if you're there and you're thinking about a career, you might want to try it out or even build your own app on your own time, which is super cool. Please try to consider mobile, and also I'm hoping this talk will help you like see what are the important things that the modern world is looking for these days, because unlike before where would you just launch your application, nowadays people are very picky and people want apps that flow and do not stop. Now, what we'll be going through in this talk is just a couple of good practices, and I'll just show you a little bit of code on what's important and what we as Android engineers look for when we're coding, and also some best practices. And let's get started. So, as I mentioned today, that's what we're looking at. Now, before we even go very far, there's something that I'm really happy about, and that is the ability of new developers using Java Compose. Now, Java Compose is just a new way of building UI in Android. It takes away from the XML. I don't know if any of us here have done that. If I was doing this talk in person, I would definitely ask if anybody has built with XML before. But a backstory is that before we used to build UI using XML, which was like a markup language, kind of like HTML, kind of, but not exactly HTML, but it's called XML. But then when we were building with that, it was pretty hard and not easy to follow through. But when Jetpack Compose came, things are now easier, and I feel like I can use the same language throughout. Now, if you are considering mobile development, we normally use Kotlin now. I know Java was the first language, but we stopped using Java. Now we use Kotlin, and Jetpack Compose is entirely in Kotlin, which makes it much easier for you as a developer, like you're using just one language to build the views and also to write your logic. So you can see that work made easier. Now, things that I always look for, especially as an Android engineer or somebody that building for the mobile application, a good experience is good navigation. Why is navigation very important? Now, if you somebody comes to your application today and they're trying to navigate from point A to point B and they cannot do that, what is the first thing they do? They will either kill the app or background the app or just delete the app. So something that I like to mention that with now modern application, it's very, very important that when you're building, have in mind that it's important to have efficient navigation, and Jetpack Compose offers that. So something that I wanted to call out. Something else that I like to call out is managing state with Jetpack Compose, and I'm hoping this talk will not going to be very, I know it's not very introductory friendly, because I know some terminology you might not have heard, but when I talk about this particular specific topics, when you also, if it really makes you feel interested, look into these particular portions and topics and then just dig deep into yourself. Now, something that is very important in managing state is normally when apps like well managed states, it can lead to, like, let's say, a variety of user experiences issues that can be very annoying and frustrating. I've been through that. Like, for instance, you have an application that you've downloaded and then the UI is very slow, it's unresponsive. It means that the state is not really very well managed. Now, something else that really annoys people is, let's say, inconsistent UI. Like, I moved from here, I went here, and then when I came back, I navigated somewhere different or I saw a different UI. That can really be sad, like for people that are using your app, which is something that you don't want to do. So it's very, very important that when we are building for the new modern world, we make sure that we think about state way in advance. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. When I was building Android applications back in 2014, which was the first time that I built my first one, I did not think about this because all this was not laid down. Like, this foundation was not there. But right now, with the new developers and new documentation, there's a lot of foundation, and I feel like right now, if you decide to do mobile as your career, it's going to be pretty straightforward and pretty easy. I know, of course, coding and the logic might be tough, but it's going to be pretty straightforward and easy. Now, something else that I like to mention, which is very important, is having reactive UI update. Reactive UI. Why is this very important? Is because mostly, for those who don't know, if you're building for mobile, unless you're building an app that's going to store data locally, most of the time we pull from APIs. So it's very important that when we're pulling from APIs, we want to update the data immediately once the API is updated back in the back end. So reactive UI updates are are a fundamental aspects of even why we decided to start using Jetpack Compose. And this is where the UI automatically, let's say, updates and responds to any changes in underlying data or state. So it's pretty very important when you're building for the modern world to think about these things. Something else that I like to also mention is that ensure that you've scoped your state and composition. State hosting and data flow is very important. And also, I know that some of you here might not have heard these words, but view model integration is very important too, to think about when you're building for the new modern world. Now, I know I can't see you all to just ask a quick question, but I would have wanted to know by a show of hands here, how many of us here have even tried mobile to begin with? But maybe I can just keep continuing because I don't want anybody to get lost in this, because I know the terminologies can really feel very in depth, and I would hate to lose anybody. Now, so something else that I also always like to consider when I'm building for the new mobile world is ensuring that I have immutable and immutability benefits. And why is this important? It's basically because Jetpack Compose promotes the use of immutable states, that is reducing errors and enhances predictability and testabilities. And also immutability ensures that each state snapshot is independent, preventing unintended side effects. So why is this important? Again, going back to the user centric. So to me, I think about the user a lot when I'm building any kind of applications, because what is the purpose of it? If the users come to your application and all of a sudden they're looking at it and they're like, what are you trying to do? Or why is this dark? So very important to think about those things. Now, I'm gonna skim through a couple of this and just go directly to one thing that I like the most, which is optimizing for performance. Now, when you're building for the modern Android world too, it's very important to optimize. Make sure that your application does not take up like 100 MBs. I mean, think about it. If I go to the Play Store and I'm trying to download your application, and to me it says 100 MBs, what is the first thing you're going to do? You're like, what is this app doing? So when you're building for the new modern world, it's always important to have that in mind. Like, always optimize. Make sure that performance is fast. Make sure that it's easy and it's very light. And you can utilize the latest Compose tools like the Dev tool, Compose Profilers, and just follow animation best practices, because I do know here animation takes a lot of processing. So if you follow the right, let's say, structures and the right just techniques that are already there, it will become very easy to make sure that the performance is very fast. Because again, you don't want applications that users are downloading and they're like, what are we trying to do? So performance is very important. Something else that I like to mention is that when you have, let's say you're trying to build an application like Twitter, right, where you have lots of data, you need to ensure that you're optimizing lazy loading and pagination, also optimizing image loading, making sure that you cache your image. And from time to time, you use your Compose UI inspector for just inspecting how your UI looks. Because sometimes one thing that I do know we always tend to fall into is, as developers, when we are building for applications, we don't know the hierarchies in our application. So we end up tying so many functions and also images to one. Like, let's say if an application has like several places, we end up tying the UI, and then it becomes harder to like even manage the threading, and then it leads to applications not responding, which leads to it either crashing or stopping, which is an experience that you don't want to give your users. Now, let's look at the code a little. Oh, so something else before I even jump to coding is testing is very important. I know most of us here, you might be in school, but know that when you're testing is very, very important. Ensure that you test your code. Without testing your code, then you're not 100% sure that you're deploying great code. So for the modern world, please ensure that when you're writing your applications, it's good practice to write tests. And this is both unit tests and UI tests. I know there's a lot of debate on the kind of tests you should write, but I always recommend if you can do both unit tests and UI tests, very important. Now, unit tests just cover unit based. This can be view models or simple functionalities, whereas UI tests cover the UI functionality. For instance, if I click a button, ensure that that button is clicked. Is that button even displayed? So that is UI testing. And now let's look at the code. So the goal of this particular small app that we're building, which is going to be pseudocode heavy, is to be able to when you get your own time, I can share these slides. Just see if you can play around with it and see if you can complete the app. But the idea was to make it more exciting. So where you can see through the best practices, and after that, you can go try to see if you can build your own application that follows the best practices. Now, the first thing that you need to know is you need to ensure that you have a build.gradle, and in the build.gradle, you will need to add this particular dependencies. So why are we using this? Because we are using the modern way of building applications. So another question that I get a lot as an Android engineer and an expert is, Madonna, should I start with XML or should I start with Compose? I would highly recommend if you're building a new application from scratch, go with Compose, because every application now is trying to utilize Compose in the existing code base. I do know there's a lot of legacy code, but with Compose, it's pretty reverse engineerable where you're able to kind of use both. So I would highly recommend if it's a new application, go with Compose. So this is what you will need. Now let's build the user interface. So to begin, you will definitely need the main screen, for instance, and the art composable annotation provided by Jetpack Compose, and it indicates that the following function is a composable function. Now, in Compose, our composable functions are building blocks of the UI in Jetpack Compose. That's how I think about them myself. And what they do is that they describe how the UI should look based on the current state and data. Remember the state we talked about. Now, in this particular composable function, we have our function main, which takes in an item, which is list of item. It has on an item click listener. Now, the way I can read this code is that this declares a composable function named main screen, as you can see there. It takes two parameters, that is a list of item object that will be displayed in our UI, and then on item click, which is a lambda function that takes an item as a parameter. Now, this function will be called when an item in the list is clicked. When you clicked that item, we display them. Now, the scaffold, and trust me, you will see my face light up when I talk about Compose. It's simply because in XML, you would have gone and started finding 100 lines of code, not codes, but snippets of codes on XML on how to do the top bar. Jetpack Compose solves that for us, which is it offers the scaffold. As you can see there, it has the top bar, and it's very straightforward. So the top bar, you can declare your app bar, and then the title is item list. Now, a scaffold is like a Compose component that provides a basic structure of a screen. That's how I think about it. That's including the top bar and the content area. And it really, really simplifies the process of creating common UI patterns, which I highly recommend when you get your time to look into it. And then the top, that, as I've mentioned, is just the top bar. When you look at the app, I know most of us here have apps. I also would have liked to ask how many of us here are using Android as compared to iOS, but they're pretty similar. So something else that I want to mention before I even go very far is that you will notice Jetpack Compose, which uses Kotlin, and Swift UI, which uses Swift. They're very, very, very similar. I did actually a talk comparing how they look, and someone was like, wow, Madonna, I can become like an iOS engineer and an Android engineer. I told them, yes, pretty possible right now. Now, let's look at how we can build our item list. So our item list, which is a function and still a composable, takes in again the list of item, and then when we click, we do that. Now, the lazy column, which is so good, is a composed component for efficiently displaying vertically scrolling list of items, and it only composes and lays out the items that are currently visible on the screen, making it suitable for large lists. For instance, if we have like a list that has 100, it's pretty easy to just use the lazy column to just lazily load them through. Now, inside the lazy column, the item function is used to iterate over the list of items, as you can see there. And for each item in the list, following block is executed, which is the list item. So what are we doing there? So I'll show you my list item block, which actually, as you can see there, is a composed component that represents an item in a vertical list, and it is used to create a list item for each item in the list. So again, I've mentioned I'll share my slides, so when you get time, just go create a simple app and try to see if you'll be able to display some data. Now, let's implement a little bit of navigation, because we need to be able to navigate from point A to point B, like I mentioned. Now, why did I mention navigation in the beginning? Because it annoys me, and I believe it annoys many other people, users of apps. So right now it's pretty easy to build with Compose, because this is how you declare navigation. Pretty easy. So we have a sealed class that a screen, and this sealed class, I can say, declares, let's say, is a special kind of class in Kotlin that represents a restricted hierarchy in which subclasses are defined within the sealed class itself. Now, it always has a primary constructor that, like a single parameter route. As you can see there, I have that, but it can always take as many. I have a talk where I talk about the bottom navigation and showcase how it can take like 3 items or even more than that based on your need. And then, as you can see there, we have the object main, screen main, and inside the screen sealed class, there's an object declaration that you can see there named main. An object in Kotlin is a singleton instance of a class. So we're kind of like just defining also what those are. And then there, as you can see, after the detail, I'm able to navigate with my item IDs. I know that can sound pretty complex, but I'm hoping that it's not very complex. But definitely it's a good start where you can get set. I also didn't get very in-depth, but hopefully it's something that people can understand. Now, here, as you can see, we showed we need to be able to navigate to a detail screen. And here, as you can see here, we have the detail screen, which has the item ID, which is a string, text in a string. And then when we've defined the item, which is the get item details, and then we pass it there in that particular function. And something else that I love about Kotlin, it's so easy to understand and read. I mean, look at that code. It's so beautiful and so clean. And I'm like, I want to keep writing this code. And to be honest, my face lights up, because this is the first time in like my career, my Android career, when I started doing Compose, I can sit down and write code without Googling. Like, I don't remember the last time I Googled. I wonder if it's doing it for so many years or it's just getting comfortable with Compose. So it's pretty cool to do it. Now, when you want to handle any navigation events, this is what you want to make sure that you do. So let's say that nav controller dot navigate, and then you have to pass the route there, and it will take you to the route that you want to do. And then finally, when you want to fetch the data, which is the data that will be displayed when we get the item, here for you can see, you can put your API there. And I said this because you can display any list. And actually, I just want to give a tip. When you're interviewing, the reason as to why I picked this particular program to showcase is because in every interview for Android engineers, because I've been there, you get like listing an API, and you get like a project where you're told to fetch something from the API and display in a list and just click the detail screen. So that's why I wanted to create a simple project to showcase anybody that wants to get started in this. How it can be pretty easy now with Jetpack Compose. And then this is how our data class item looks like. As you can see here, we pass it a lot, that list of item. When I show here, I'm like clicking on my other screen here because I'm looking at this one, but that's where you can see the items. But here, as you can see in this basic example, each item has an ID of type string and a name of type string. and then we adjust the properties based on the characteristic of our item once we get them, and then we display them to our screen. And then voila, finally, in our main activity, which is now the entry point of our application, this is where you'll call it, and then you'll handle all your stuff. Like, it's pretty straightforward. Once you're done, you should be able to call this there and then display once you get the items. As you see there, val items equals get item, the function that we created. And then after that, we do main screen, which is the fastest screen that we created. And then handle items, navigate to detail screen. Once you're done, once they've loaded, you can show them. So, yeah, thank you so much for listening to this short talk. I hope I did not go over time, but one thing that I wanted to mention is it's always a learning journey. So, if you have any question about Android, don't forget to connect with me. I'm always responsive on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and I will help guide you in the best way. And also, I wanted to mention this is a book that I wrote too. I cover a lot of how to build components and applications in the modern world, and it's been super cool so far. And that's how you can connect with me. Thank you so much. I hope I did not go over time, Sharon. Okay. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Totally. Thank you. Yeah. Mm. Mhm. Wow, yeah, that's also a great, great question. Now, number one, we have the rule of collaboration. In every working environment, there's always collaboration. And so the way it works is that we have, so everywhere I've worked so far, we've followed the agile methodologies. Now, agile methodologies is where we ship software within a 2 week sprint. So what happens is that we come together with the product team, and then the product team sets the tone for what needs to be out there for that particular sprint. And this is just us having like a sprint goal. Like, let's say this particular sprint goal, we want to release this particular feature. Now, what happens is that now we sit down, we start doing something called like it's think about it like a refactor or a session where you think about, so which code needs to be written, right? Who's going to write this code? So when we sit down as a team, now we decide, okay, Madonna is going to pick up this code, and then I agree, like, yes, I'll pick it. Sometimes people don't pick other parts if they think it's complex. So if you're a software engineer, they always look up to you, like to say, to raise your hand first. So that's something I've also experienced. But other than that, we use Git too to collaborate. I don't know, you know about Git, the version control. So nice, perfect. So from time to time, you might find that if you work for a company, mostly banks use Bitbucket, but I feel like startups and other companies use, let's say, GitHub. But also, I think bigger companies use different tools too, because it different security reasons. But yes, that's how we collaborate. You are assigned a ticket, you work on your ticket, and then based on that, you send a pull request. It's called a pull request to either the GitHub or the Bitbucket, and then somebody reviews your code and then approves your code, and then it's merged in. And I feel like that's how many of, let's say, mobile works, to be specific, and also others. I feel like if I was doing, let's say, a project in web too, that's how I would work, because normally it's just incremental codes that get shipped together and then packaged together, and then there's a release at the end of the sprint or whichever time like your team decides they need to release it. But that's the process. It's pretty nice. Yeah. Nice. We don't have many people interested, so I'm happy you're interested. I mean, we do have many developers, but I do feel like right now everybody's running to AI, and I'm like, we need mobile engineers. Everybody's gonna use the phone. It's here to stay. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, nice. Yeah, and just to add to it, I feel like since you already have like a background in Swift, trying to move to Compose, it's going to be, trust me, because it's so similar, you'll be shocked. Like you can be now like a mobile engineer that builds iOS and Android at the same time. It's amazing. Like I'm building. I don't know if I can show my app. I was building. So I have my company and I'm into real estate, and I was building like the real estate app that we need, and I'm building with Compose. Like I'm building it. Like it's so amazing. So I was just looking at it today because we released our internal testing where people can actually start testing, and it's seamless. Like it's, I don't know if you can see. Oh, hold on, I'm gonna try to remove the effect, but allow me to just share because it excites me a lot. So you see here, so this is the app. It's so like Jetpack Compose makes things so seamless, and then you can be able to navigate to a screen. You can view, let's say if you click on that, you can see the properties there. Super cool. It's just cool stuff. Yeah. And for me as an engineer now, building that, I'm able to just go to Swift and build pretty fast too, like because I know what I'm doing. It's unbelievable. But I'm an expert in Android because I concentrated in Android first. So something that I've also learned over the years is that once you know one technology very well, the rest come easy. Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. With time, they all come pretty easy. Super cool. Yeah. Thank you too. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.